He thought it was just another late night at the office, fixing numbers for a boss who barely noticed him. But when Nora whispered, "Now we're alone," her voice carried a weight that stopped his breath. What she'd say next would haunt him for years. The fluorescent lights in the office of Harrow and Lane Consulting flickered like a dying pulse, casting long shadows across the open-plan space on the 5th floor of a glass building at the corner of Eldridge Street and Marwood Avenue in Portland. The city outside was cloaked in late October drizzle, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes every surface gleam with a wet gray sheen. I was 23, still green in the ways of the corporate world, my desk a chaotic sprawl of spreadsheets, sticky notes, and a chipped coffee mug that hadn't seen a dishwasher in weeks. My name's Ethan Caldwell, no relation to anyone noteworthy, just a kid fresh out of college, trying to prove I belonged in a world that felt too big for me. I'd been at the firm for 8 months, a junior analyst crunching numbers and dodging the occasional office politics. The job was a lifeline, a step into adulthood I wasn't sure I was ready for. The office itself was a revolving door of faces, consultants with sharp suits, analysts with sharper egos, interns who came and went like seasons. But the one constant was Nora Hadley, our boss. She was the kind of woman who could silence a room with a single glance. Late 30s, maybe early 40s, her dark hair always pulled back in a low bun, her tailored blazers a shield against the world. Her beauty wasn't loud, but it was impossible to ignore. Sharp cheekbones, eyes that held stories she'd never share. I'd catch her sometimes, staring out the conference room window, her fingers tracing the edge of a pen, lost in a thought I'd never be privy to. She carried a weight, a quiet sorrow that made her seem older than her years, though her poise never faltered. That morning, the office buzzed with a nervous energy, whispers of budget cuts and layoffs snaking through the cubicles like wildfire. I kept my head down, my fingers hovering over my keyboard, pretending I wasn't listening. At 10 a.m., Nora called us into the main conference room, a space too small for all 22 of us. People squeezed in, leaning against walls, perching on tables, the air thick with anticipation. I stood near the back, my hands stuffed in my pockets, my stomach twisting with the certainty that my time here was up. Nora stood at the front, her posture rigid, her face a mask of calm. "The firm is restructuring," she said, her voice steady but sharp, cutting through the murmurs. "Effective immediately. We're downsizing. Most of you will receive severance packages by the end of the day. I'm sorry." The room froze, then erupted into a chaos of questions, angry, desperate, pleading. Nora answered each one with the same measured tone, like she'd rehearsed this moment 100 times. I stayed silent, my eyes fixed on the carpet, waiting for the email that would end my short career here. By noon, the office was half empty, boxes of personal belongings stacked by the elevators, the hum of keyboards replaced by a hollow quiet. I sat at my desk, refreshing my inbox, bracing for the inevitable. It never came. By 3 p.m., the place was a graveyard. The only sounds were the faint hum of the air conditioning and the occasional creak of my chair. I was still at my desk, sifting through the Kessler account, when I heard her voice. "Ethan." I looked up. Nora stood in the doorway of her corner office, one hand resting on the frame, her blazer off, her white blouse slightly untucked, a rare glimpse of imperfection. Her dark hair was still pinned up, but a few strands had escaped, framing her face. She was beautiful in a way that hit you slowly, like a sunrise you didn't notice until it was too bright to ignore. "Can you come in here for a moment?" My throat tightened, but I nodded and followed her. Her office was a sanctuary of glass and steel, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River, its surface rippling under the gray sky. Papers were scattered across her desk, a half-drunk glass of water beside a stack of folders. She motioned for me to sit, but she didn't take her own chair. Instead, she leaned against the edge of her desk, arms crossed, her eyes studying me like I was a puzzle she hadn't quite solved. "You're probably wondering why you're still here," she said, her voice softer than it had been in the meeting, but still carrying that quiet authority. I nodded, my palms sweaty against my slacks. "Yeah, I thought I'd be gone with the rest." She tilted her head, her gaze lingering a moment too long. "We're keeping a skeleton crew. You're part of it. Your work on the Meridian Project impressed the partners. They see potential in you." I blinked, trying to process. The Meridian Project, a brutal, late-night slog of market analysis fueled by energy drinks and desperation, had been a nightmare, but I'd poured everything into it. I hadn't thought anyone noticed. "Thank you," I said, my voice smaller than I meant it to be. "Don't thank me yet," she said, a faint edge to her tone. "It's going to be a lot of work. Just you and me for now." The words landed heavier than they should have. Just you and me. I told myself it was nothing, just a practical statement about the state of the firm. But the way her eyes held mine, the way the air seemed to thicken, made my chest tighten. I nodded again, unsure what else to do. "I need you to pull the financials for the Kessler account by tomorrow," she said, straightening, her tone shifting back to business. "Can you handle it?" "Yes," I said too quickly, then steadied myself. Yeah, I can do that." "Good." She gave a small nod, then turned to her computer, a clear dismissal. I left her office, my heart pounding for reasons I couldn't name, the echo of her words, "just you and me," ringing in my ears. The rest of the day was a blur of numbers and caffeine. I stayed late, the only one left in the building except for the security guard downstairs. The Kessler financials were a labyrinth of errors and inconsistencies, and I was neck-deep in them when I heard footsteps. Nora appeared at my desk, her coat draped over her arm, a leather satchel slung over her shoulder. Her hair was looser now, a few more strands falling free, and her blouse carried the faint creases of a long day. "You're still here," she said, her tone somewhere between surprise and amusement. "Trying to get this done," I said, gesturing at my screen, my eyes burning from hours of staring at numbers. "It's a mess." She stepped closer, glancing at my monitor. Her perfume hit me, cedar and citrus, subtle but sharp, like a memory I hadn't lived yet. I froze, hyper-aware of her standing just inches away. "You don't have to finish tonight," she said. "Go home, Ethan. Get some rest." "I'm fine," I said, though my voice betrayed my exhaustion. "I want to make sure it's right." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she set her satchel down and pulled up a chair, sitting beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her presence. "Show me what you've got," she said, her voice low, like we were conspirators in some unspoken plot. For the next hour, we worked through the financials together. Her focus was razor-sharp, her questions cutting through my muddled thoughts like a knife. She pointed out errors I'd missed, her finger brushing the edge of my keyboard as she leaned in. Every time her hand moved close to mine, I felt a jolt, like a circuit completing. I told myself it was just the late hour, the empty office, my tired brain playing tricks. But deep down, I knew it was more. By 9 p.m., we'd made enough progress to call it quits. Nora leaned back in her chair, stretching her arms above her head, and for a moment I saw the exhaustion in her, not just from today, but from years of carrying something heavy. Her blouse shifted slightly, revealing the curve of her collarbone, and I looked away, my face warm. "You're good at this," she said almost to herself, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "Better than you give yourself credit for." "Thanks," I muttered, my throat tight. I didn't know what else to say, didn't trust myself to say more. She stood, picking up her satchel, her movements slow, deliberate. "Lock up when you leave," she said, pausing at the edge of my desk. Then, quieter, almost a whisper, "And Ethan, now we're alone." The words hit me like a shock wave. I looked up, but she was already walking away, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor, leaving me in the silence of the empty office. My heart was racing, my mind a tangle of questions I didn't dare ask. Now we're alone. It wasn't just about the office, not with the way she'd said it, the way her eyes had lingered on mine. I sat there for another 10 minutes, staring at my screen without seeing it, the weight of her words settling into my bones. This was only the beginning. You can't imagine what she'll say when the clock strikes midnight. The rain hadn't let up by morning, a steady drizzle that painted Portland's streets in a slick, reflective sheen, turning the city into a muted watercolor. My apartment on Tabor Street was a cramped one-bedroom, the kind of place where the radiator hissed all night and the windows rattled in their frames. I'd barely slept, my mind caught in a loop of Nora's voice. "Now we're alone." And the way her eyes had held mine, like she was seeing something I hadn't meant to show. I was 23, still navigating the edges of adulthood, and she was my boss, a woman in her late 30s or early 40s, her life a mystery I couldn't begin to unravel. I told myself I was overthinking it, that the late-night haze of the empty office had warped my perception. But as I pulled on my jacket and headed out, the knot in my stomach told me otherwise. Harrow and Lane's office on Eldridge Street felt like a tomb when I arrived. The open-plan space, once alive with phone calls and keyboard clatter, was now a sea of empty cubicles, some still bearing traces of their former occupants, a stray pen, a forgotten coffee cup, a post-it note curled at the edges. My desk was a mess, papers strewn across it like fallen leaves, my monitor glowing with the Kessler account I'd been wrestling with for days. I sat down, trying to focus, but my eyes kept drifting to Nora's office door, closed and silent, the blinds drawn tight. Around 8:30 she arrived, her heels announcing her before I saw her. She carried a paper cup from the coffee shop on Marwood Avenue, the logo smudged from the rain. Her navy dress was sharp, professional, but there was a softness to her today. Her hair looser, her posture less rigid. She was beautiful in a way that felt unfair, her age only adding depth to her presence like a painting you couldn't stop staring at. I caught myself watching her too long and forced my eyes back to my screen, my fingers fumbling over the keyboard. "Morning, Ethan," she said, pausing at my desk, her voice warm but measured, like she was testing the air between us. She set a stack of folders down, their edges worn from use. "I need you to cross-reference these with the Kessler data. There's a discrepancy in the Q3 projections I can't pin down." "Got it," I said, taking the folders, my hands brushing the edge of the desk where hers had been. "I'll get started." She lingered, her fingers resting lightly on the stack, her eyes studying me. "You look like you didn't sleep," she said, not unkindly. "Everything okay?" "Just late night," I said, rubbing the back of my neck, my face warm under her gaze. "The Kessler stuff's a beast." Her lips twitched, almost a smile. "Don't let it swallow you whole. We need you in one piece." The "we" hit me harder than it should have, like a door left slightly ajar. I nodded, mumbling something about getting to work, and she moved on to her office, the click of her door shutting like a punctuation mark. I buried myself in the folders, but my mind kept drifting, to the way her voice had softened last night, to the weight of her words, to the way her presence seemed to fill the empty office like a pulse. The day dragged on, a blur of numbers and emails, the rain outside a constant drumbeat against the windows. Nora was in and out, her office door opening and closing as she took calls or stepped out for meetings. Every time she passed my desk, I noticed something new. The way her bracelet caught the light, the faint creases in her dress from sitting too long, the way her steps slowed just slightly when she neared me. It was stupid, I told myself, letting these details take root in my head. She was my boss, a woman who'd probably seen more of the world than I could imagine, and I was just a kid trying to keep up. But the details stuck, sharp and persistent, like thorns. Around 4 p.m., the power flickered, the lights buzzing before plunging the office into darkness. My computer screen blinked out, and I heard Nora curse softly from her office, a rare slip that made me smile despite myself. I grabbed my phone, switching on the flashlight, and made my way to the breaker panel in the back room, a cramped space behind a storage closet, all dust and tangled wires. I'd fixed a tripped breaker once in college, back when I shared a dorm with a guy who kept overloading the circuit with his gaming setup. I figured I could handle this. I was flipping switches, squinting at the faded labels, when I heard her voice. "Need a hand?" Nora stood in the doorway, her own phone casting a soft glow across her face. Her sleeves were rolled up, her hair falling in loose strands, and the light made her look softer, more human than the polished boss I was used to. "I think I've got it," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure. "Just a trip breaker, probably." She stepped closer, her shoulder brushing mine as she leaned in to inspect the panel. "This building's older than dirt," she said, her voice low, almost playful. "Try the one on the left." I flipped the switch she pointed to, and the lights hummed back to life, flooding the room with harsh fluorescence. We both blinked, caught off guard, and for a moment we were standing too close, her arm still near mine, the air between us thick with something unspoken. I stepped back, clearing my throat. "That did it." "Nice work," she said, her eyes meeting mine, a flicker of something, amusement maybe, or something heavier, passing through them. "You're full of surprises, Ethan." "Just a dorm room trick," I said, trying to keep it light, but my voice sounded strained, like I was holding my breath. Her perfume lingered, cedar and citrus, grounding me and unmooring me all at once. She didn't move away immediately, her gaze holding mine a beat too long. "You're more than just a numbers guy," she said, her tone soft but deliberate, like she was choosing her words carefully. "You don't give yourself enough credit." I didn't know how to respond, so I just shrugged, my hands shoved deep in my pockets. She stepped back, breaking the moment, and we returned to the main office, the hum of the lights filling the silence. But the air felt different now, charged, like the storm brewing outside was seeping into the room. By 7 p.m., I was still at my desk, the Kessler data refusing to cooperate. Nora appeared again, her coat on, her satchel slung over her shoulder. "I'm heading out," she said, pausing by my desk. "But I need a favor. My car's acting up again. Won't start. I was going to call a tow, but—" "I can take a look," I said, standing before I could think better of it. I wasn't a mechanic, but I'd tinkered with my old Civic enough to know a few tricks. Besides, the idea of leaving her stranded in the rain didn't sit right with me. She hesitated, her eyes searching mine, then nodded. "All right. It's in the lot across from Marwood." We walked out together, the evening air cold and damp. the streetlights casting fractured reflections on the wet pavement. Her Audi was parked under a flickering light, its sleek black frame looking out of place in the gritty lot. I popped the hood, the rain pattering against my jacket as I checked the battery terminals. The starter gave a weak click when I tried it, a sound I recognized from my own car troubles. "Could be the alternator," I said, wiping my hands on my jeans. "Or a loose connection. I can try jumping it if you've got cables." "I don't," she said, frowning, her arms crossed against the chill. "I should, but I don't." "I've got some in my car," I said, jogging to my Civic a few spaces away. I grabbed the cables from the trunk, my heart pounding for no good reason, and returned to find her leaning against her car, her face half lit by the streetlight, raindrops catching in her hair like tiny jewels. "You don't have to do this," she said as I hooked up the cables. "I can call roadside." "It's no trouble," I said, focusing on the task, though her presence made it hard to concentrate. The jump worked, and her car roared to life, the engine's hum cutting through the rain. She slid into the driver's seat, leaving the door open, and looked at me. "You're a lifesaver, Ethan." "Just doing my part," I said, trying to play it off, but my voice caught as her hand brushed mine, taking the cables. The touch was brief, electric, and I froze, my pulse hammering in my ears. "Get in," she said, nodding to the passenger seat. "I'll drive you to your car. It's the least I can do." I hesitated, then climbed in, the leather interior cool and smelling faintly of her perfume. We didn't speak as she pulled out of the lot, the silence heavy but not uncomfortable, like we were both holding our breath. When we reached my car, she stopped, her hand still on the wheel, her eyes fixed on the windshield. "Thanks," I said, my hand on the door handle, but I didn't move. Neither did she. "Ethan," she said, her voice low, almost lost in the sound of the rain. "Why do you stay so late?" I blinked, caught off guard. "I just want to do a good job," I said, the words feeling inadequate. She turned to me then, her eyes searching mine, her expression unreadable. "You don't have to prove anything to me," she said, her voice soft but piercing. "You're already enough." The words hit me like a punch, raw and unexpected. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. She looked away, her hands tightening on the wheel, and the moment slipped away like the rain down the windshield. "Good night, Ethan," she said, her voice steady again, like she was pulling herself back from the edge. "Good night," I mumbled, stepping out into the rain, my heart still racing. As I watched her drive away, her taillights blurring in the storm, I knew something had shifted, something I couldn't undo. What she says next will change everything for her and for me. The storm rolled into Portland like a warning, the sky bruising purple as rain lashed the city in relentless sheets. I woke up in my Tabor Street apartment, the radiator clanking, my head thick with fragments of the previous night. Nora's voice, soft and heavy with meaning, saying, "You're already enough." I was 23, barely holding my own in a world that felt too big, too fast, and she was my boss, a woman in her late 30s or early 40s, her life a locked book I had no business trying to open. But her words had lodged in me, sharp and unyielding, like a splinter I couldn't pull out. I dragged myself out of bed, the floor cold under my feet, and got ready for another day at Heroin Lane, my stomach knotted with something I couldn't name. The office was a mausoleum when I arrived, the silence so thick it seemed to hum. Empty cubicles stretched out like abandoned houses, some still marked by the ghosts of their former occupants, a stray paperclip, a forgotten mug, a desk chair angled just so. My own desk was a battlefield of papers, coffee stains, and post-it notes. The Kessler account still open on my monitor, its numbers a puzzle I hadn't cracked. I sat down, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and tried to focus, but my eyes kept drifting to Nora's office door, shut tight, the blinds drawn like a curtain over a stage I wasn't sure I wanted to step onto. She arrived around 8:45, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor, a paper coffee cup from the shop on Marwood Avenue in her hand. She wore a charcoal blazer over a cream blouse, her dark hair pulled back but with a few strands loose, framing her face in a way that made her look less like the untouchable boss I'd met 8 months ago and more like a woman carrying a weight she couldn't set down. Her beauty was quiet, the kind that hit you harder the longer you looked, her age only adding a depth that made my chest ache. I caught myself staring and forced my eyes back to my screen, my fingers clumsy on the keyboard. "Morning, Ethan," she said, pausing at my desk, her voice warm but careful, like she was stepping around something fragile. She set a thick folder down, its edges frayed from use. "I need you to dig into the Kessler projections again. There's a gap in the revenue stream I can't figure out." "I'm on it," I said, taking the folder, my hand brushing the corner where hers had been. The touch was nothing, incidental, but it sent a jolt through me, like a wire sparking. "I'll let you know what I find." She nodded, her eyes lingering on me a moment longer than necessary. "You look exhausted," she said, her tone softer now, almost concerned. "You sure you're okay?" "Just the usual," I said, forcing a half smile, my neck hot under her gaze. "Late nights and bad coffee." She didn't smile back, but her expression softened, her lips parting slightly as if she wanted to say something more. Instead, she nodded and moved to her office, the door closing with a soft click that echoed in the empty space. I buried myself in the Kessler data, but my mind kept slipping. To the way her voice had dropped last night, to the brush of her hand when I handed her the jumper cables, to the weight of her words in the car. "You're already enough." It was a simple phrase, but it felt like a key to a door I wasn't sure I should open. The day passed in a haze of spreadsheets and emails, the rain outside a constant roar that made the office feel like a bunker. Nora was in and out, her office door opening for phone calls or brief trips to the copier, each pass by my desk leaving a trail of her perfume, cedar and citrus, sharp and grounding. I noticed too much, the way her bracelet slid down her wrist when she reached for a file, the faint creases in her blazer from hours at her desk, the way her steps slowed just barely when she walked by me. I told myself it was nothing, that I was projecting my own restlessness onto her, but the air felt heavier every time she was near, like we were circling something neither of us could name. Around 4:30, the power flickered, the lights stuttering before plunging the office into darkness. My screen went black, and I heard Nora mutter something sharp under her breath from her office, a rare break in her composure that made me grin despite the situation. I grabbed my phone, the flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, and made my way to the breaker panel in the back room, a dusty closet packed with wires and old equipment. I'd dealt with a tripped breaker once before, in a college dorm where the outlets were as temperamental as the roommates. I figured I could manage. I was squinting at the panel, flipping switches with more hope than confidence, when Nora's voice came from behind me. "You sure you know what you're doing?" She stood in the doorway, her phone's light casting soft shadows across her face, her sleeves rolled up to her elbows, her hair looser now, falling in dark waves. She looked tired, human, her age showing in the faint lines around her eyes, but there was a spark in her expression. Amusement, maybe, or something deeper. "I've got it under control," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure. probably just a surge from the storm. She stepped closer, her shoulder brushing mine as she leaned in to peer at the panel. "That this building's wiring is a nightmare," she said, her voice low, almost conspiratorial. "Try the one on the far right." Her breath was warm, her presence overwhelming in the cramped space. I flipped the switch she indicated, and the lights buzzed back to life, the sudden brightness making us both flinch. For a moment we were too close, her arm still near mine, the air thick with the scent of her perfume and the hum of electricity. I stepped back, my heart pounding, and cleared my throat. That did it. "Good call," she said, her eyes meeting mine, a flicker of something, curiosity maybe, or something heavier, passing through them. "You're handy for a guy who spends his days buried in spreadsheets." "Learned a few tricks in college," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but it came out rough, like I'd been holding my breath too long. "Breakers, faucets, whatever kept the dorm from falling apart." She tilted her head, a half smile playing on her lips. "A regular hero." The word hung there, light but loaded, and I didn't know how to respond. Was she teasing? Testing me? I shoved my hands in my pockets, muttering something about getting back to work, and she nodded, stepping out of the closet, her heels clicking softly as we returned to the main office. But the moment lingered, a spark that hadn't quite died, and I felt it every time our eyes met for the rest of the afternoon. By 7:30 I was still at my desk, the Kessler data fighting me at every turn. The storm outside had worsened, thunder rumbling in the distance, the windows rattling in their frames. Nora appeared, her coat on, her satchel slung over her shoulder, her hair damp from a quick step outside. "I'm calling it," she said, pausing by my desk. "But I need a favor. My car's dead again. Same problem as last night. I was going to call a tow, but—" "I can check it out," I said, standing before I could second-guess myself. I wasn't a mechanic, but I'd gotten her Audi running once, and the thought of her stuck in the rain felt wrong, like leaving a job half done. Might just need another jump. She hesitated, her eyes searching mine, then nodded. "All right, it's in the lot across from Marwood." We walked out together, the air cold and heavy with rain, the streetlights casting fractured glows on the wet pavement. Her Audi sat under the same flickering light, its black frame gleaming like obsidian. I popped the hood, the rain soaking through my jacket as I checked the battery. The starter clicked weakly, a familiar sound that spelled trouble. "Could be the alternator," I said, wiping my hands on my jeans, the cold biting my fingers. "I can try jumping it again if you've got cables." "I don't," she said, her voice barely carrying over the rain, her arms crossed against the chill. "I keep meaning to get some." "I've got mine," I said, jogging to my Civic a few spaces away, the rain pelting my face. I grabbed the cables from the trunk, my pulse racing for reasons that had nothing to do with the weather. When I returned, Nora was leaning against her car, her blazer dark with rain, her hair clinging to her neck in wet strands. She looked vulnerable, not the polished boss I knew, but a woman caught in a moment she hadn't planned for. "You don't have to do this," she said as I hooked up the cables, her voice soft but firm. "I can handle it." "It's no trouble," I said, focusing on the task, though her presence made my hands unsteady. The jump worked, the engine roaring to life, a small victory against the storm. She slid into the driver's seat, leaving the door open, and looked at me, her face half lit by the streetlight, raindrops catching in her eyelashes. "You're a lifesaver, Ethan," she said, her voice low, almost intimate. "Just doing my part," I said, trying to keep it light, but my voice caught as her hand brushed mine, taking the cables. The touch was fleeting, but it burned, a spark that traveled up my arm and settled in my chest. I froze, my breath shallow, the rain a cold counterpoint to the heat in my face. "Get in," she said, nodding to the passenger seat. "I'll drive you to your car. It's pouring." I hesitated, then climbed in, the leather interior cool and smelling of her. Cedar, citrus, something uniquely Nora. We didn't speak as she pulled out of the lot, the wipers slashing through the rain, the silence between us heavy with unspoken things. When we reached my car, she stopped, her hands still on the wheel, her eyes fixed on the windshield like she was afraid to look at me. "Thanks," I said, my hand on the door handle, but I didn't move. The rain pounded the roof, a steady rhythm that matched my pulse. She didn't move either, her fingers tightening on the wheel, her breath visible in the cool air. "Ethan," she said, her voice so soft it was nearly lost in the storm, "why do you stay so late?" The question caught me off guard, raw and direct. I swallowed, my throat tight. "I want to do right by you," I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "By the job, I mean. I don't want to let you down." She turned to me then, her eyes searching mine, her expression a mix of vulnerability and something else, something that made my heart stutter. "You're not letting me down," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're more than I expected." The words hung there, heavy and dangerous, like a bridge we weren't supposed to cross. I wanted to say something, to diffuse the tension, but my mouth was dry, my thoughts a tangle. She looked away, her hands clenching the wheel, and the moment slipped away, washed out by the rain. "Good night, Ethan," she said, her voice steady again, like she was pulling herself back from the edge of something. "Good night," I said, stepping out into the storm, my jacket soaked through in seconds. I watched her drive away, her tail lights blurring into the rain, my heart pounding with the weight of what hadn't been said. What she says next will change everything. For her, and for me.